Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before, and if you haven't, then welcome. Today I'll be showing you how I made this jean butterfly purse from some jeans that I got at the thrift store. So I hope that you all can follow along with the way that I learned how to sew a purse. First, I got 2 pair of jeans from the thrift store. You don't need 2 pair, and you also don't have to use jean if you prefer to make it with regular fabric. But I got 2 different pair of jeans because I wanted a color contrast for the butterfly. Then I got a cute lining fabric for the inside of the purse. I will also be adding the pattern that I drafted to create this purse below, but keep in mind that you can use another purse pattern if you prefer. I also bought some interfacing, and I will leave the link in the description box below for this specific interfacing. Interfacing is optional, but it does help to make the purse sturdier. I also used a cutting ruler, sewing clips, pins, and an 8-inch zipper. I'll also leave the link in the description box to the zipper pack that I got off of Amazon. I used ribbon to tie up the butterfly in the front, but you could use anything that you would like to lace the butterfly with. I used fabric weights to hold down the pattern. You'll need something to cut out your fabric with. I also used a washable pencil to mark my seam on the fabric. I used 2 different color threads. I used a lighter color for the butterfly just because I wanted the outline to show. And then I used a darker color thread to match the color of the main fabric of the purse. You'll also need some tape and regular scissors if you're going to cut out the pattern. And I used my iron and ironing board for some of the pieces and to add the interfacing to the fabric. First, I cut out all of the pattern pieces needed to make the purse, and I listed the amount of pieces needed for each fabric on the pattern. So here I'm just cutting out the different pieces needed. I did give a few options for the inner butterfly pieces. The ones that I used were for the laced up front of the butterfly, but I also gave 2 other options if you prefer not to add the lace up part to the butterfly. I haven't tried out the other options yet, but I did measure them to make sure that they fit inside of the outer butterfly piece. Just to show a visual of the pieces I cut out, for the main fabric I cut out 2 side panels, a bottom panel, the strap, 2 inner butterfly top pieces, and 2 inner butterfly bottom pieces, 2 zipper pieces. Next, I cut out 1 of the outer butterfly pieces, and you can use the same fabric as the other main fabric that you were using, but I decided to use a lighter color to add contrast for the butterfly. For the lining fabric, I cut out 2 side panels, 1 bottom panel, 1 pocket piece, which is different from the pocket interfacing piece, and then 2 zipper pieces. And then for the interfacing, I cut out the bottom panel, side panels, pocket interfacing piece, and the interfacing for the strap. But I doubled up on some of the interfacing pieces because when I made a purse with only 1 layer of this interfacing, it didn't seem like it was sturdy enough. So I decided to try adding another layer this time. So for the bottom panels, I cut out 2 pieces of interfacing. And for the side panels, I cut out 4 pieces of interfacing. But the pocket interfacing and the strap interfacing, I only did 1 layer. And this is also my first time using interfacing, so I'm sure it would be better to just get a thicker interfacing for next time. After I finished cutting out all of the pieces, I moved to the ironing board to start ironing the purse pieces. I started with the strap. I folded both sides in 1/4 of an inch and ironed them down. After I ironed the edges down, I folded the strap in half so that those edges are touching, and I ironed it down. Next, I added in the piece of the interfacing that I cut out. And keep in mind, anytime I use the interfacing, it's optional. Next, I took a side panel of the main fabric and a side panel of the interfacing, and I placed the interfacing sides so that the rough side with the glue dots was touching the wrong side of the main fabric. And these instructions were on the package that I got of the interfacing that I used, and I will leave a snippet of those here so you can pause to read. And I basically just ironed it down so that the interfacing stuck to the back of the main fabric. And here I'm just cutting out any extra interfacing that's sticking out of the main fabric just to keep it clean. Next, I added the second layer of interfacing for the side panel on top of the interfacing that I already ironed on. I made sure that the glue dots or the rough part of the interfacing was touching the interfacing that I already ironed down. Then I just placed some scrap fabric over it in order to iron it down, since you can't iron directly on the interfacing. Then I followed the same steps for the other side panel of main fabric and 2 side panels of interfacing. I also followed the same steps for the bottom panel with the 1 piece of main fabric and 2 pieces of interfacing fabric. Once I completed that, I moved on to the pocket. I folded the pocket piece of the lining fabric in half long ways and ironed it down. Next, I added the interfacing for the pocket, so I used a side panel of the lining fabric and the pocket interfacing piece. I folded the side panel in half just to mark the center. And I did the same for the interfacing. Once the interfacing piece was lined up to the center of the side panel, I measured about 1/2 inch from the top of the side panel. Then I used the scrap piece of fabric to iron over. And those are all of the pieces that need to be ironed. I just went through all of the other pieces and ironed them to make sure that they didn't have any wrinkles. Then I started on the butterfly piece. I started by marking 1/8 of an inch all the way around the butterfly on the right side of the fabric. I marked the seam with dots at first, and then I went in and connected the dots with lines. Then I did the same for the 4 inner butterfly pieces, the top pieces and the bottom pieces. I marked 1/8 of an inch seam all the way around except for on the straight edge. After I marked the seam, I measured 1 inch away from the straight edge on the end and marked a line. Next, I'll sew along the seam that I marked from the edge all the way to the end of that 1 inch mark I made on both edges of each inner butterfly piece. And here is where I used the lighter thread because I wanted the seams to pop out a little bit more. After I finished sewing those edges, I placed the inner butterfly pieces inside of the outer butterfly piece. And I just made sure that they didn't overlap with the seam that I marked for the outer butterfly piece. And once I was happy with the placement, I pinned all of the inner butterfly pieces down. But when I pinned them down, I made sure not to pin the straight edge on the end down where I just sewed the edges. And this is because I'll be folding those pieces. Then I folded all of the straight edges of the inner butterfly pieces down. And when I folded them down, I just made sure that they went a little bit under the 1 inch mark that I made to make sure that when I was sewing on that 1 inch line that it will catch the bottom that I folded under. This will create the loop for the lacing and attach the inner butterfly pieces to the outer butterfly piece. Once all 4 inner butterfly pieces are attached, I took out the pins and sewed along the remaining seams for all 4 inner butterfly pieces. And to make sure that I was able to sew the seams as closely as possible, I went really slow. I even did some manual sewing using the side of the sewing machine and slowly turned the project just to make sure that I was able to sew as close to the seam that I marked as possible, since this will be very visible on the front of the purse. And once I finished that, I could add the butterfly to one of the side panels of the main fabric. I folded both pieces in half just to mark the halfway point. Then I measured 1.75 inches from the top of the side panel for the top of the butterfly to start. And once I was comfortable with the butterfly placement, I pinned it down and I put the pins toward the center of the butterfly since I'll be sewing on this seam along the outer butterfly. And from here, I sewed along the seam of the outer butterfly that I drew with the pencil. Then I switch my thread to the color of the main fabric and top stitch on both edges of the strap as close to the edge as you can get. Next, for the pocket piece that was ironed in half, with the folded edge on top, sew along the edges 1/4 inch, but leave a hole in the middle to turn the piece right side out. Then I cut off all 4 corners, making sure not to cut into the seam. After that, I could turn the pocket piece right side out. And I ironed it down so it could be flat. Next, I grabbed the side panel of the lining fabric with the pocket interfacing piece ironed onto it. And the pocket interfacing piece that we ironed on is just used for support. And I folded both pieces in half to mark the center point. Then I placed the pocket piece on the right side of the side panel and made sure that they lined up in the center. 1 inch from the top of the side panel. I also made sure that the side of the pocket with the hole was facing down. That way it will be stitched closed whenever I'm sewing the pocket onto the lining piece. Then I sewed down the pocket all the way around except for on the top edge. And in this case, I also sewed as close to the seam as possible. And this is what it looked like with the pocket attached. Next, I had to attach the zipper pieces to the zipper. So I used the 8-inch zipper and the 4 zipper pieces that I cut out. I unzipped the zipper about halfway so that it didn't get in the way. I placed the main fabric piece and the lining piece with right sides facing, and I made sure that the end of the zipper was in between them, with the right side of the zipper facing the main fabric and the wrong side of the zipper facing the right side of the lining fabric. And I did the same for the other side of the zipper, but since I unzipped the zipper a little bit, I kind of had to hold those 2 pieces together before I clipped them. Next, I'll sew these pieces down with a straight line, getting as close to the zipper part as possible without touching it. Then I folded the zipper pieces back so that the right sides of the fabric are exposed, and I ironed it down. Then I grabbed the remaining of the purse pieces except for the strap, so the bottom panel, the 4 side panels, and the zipper, and I folded each of them in half and made a tiny slit at the halfway point just to mark it for when I sew it together. Next, I attached the first two side panels to the zipper, and in order to do this, I grabbed the side panel with the butterfly and the lining side panel without the pocket. I placed the zipper on top of the butterfly side panel with right sides facing, and then I added the lining side panel on top with the right sides facing down. I was able to line up the center of the pieces easily because of the small slits that I made in each of the pieces. First, I pinned down the center. Then I was able to pull the sides of the zipper up as I pinned along the top edge of the side panels. So all edges should be aligned, the main fabric, the zipper, and the lining fabric. I also made sure that the zipper was pulled in a little bit so that it didn't get in the way when I first started to sew along the edge. And I did a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this part. And whenever I was sewing along the edge of the zipper, I did have to sew a little bit and then stop, pull the zipper back, and then continue to sew. After I completed sewing the edge of those pieces, I cut off the excess of the zipper pieces that were sticking out. And then I made small slits along the curved edge and made sure not to cut into the seam. And cutting the slits along the curved edge will just help the fabric to lie flat and conform to the curve without bunching or puckering up. Next, flip the lining piece up to expose the butterfly side panel and the zipper. The right side of the zipper should be facing the butterfly piece. I made sure to pull the zipper down a little bit again, and then pin the other main side panel with the right side facing the right side of the zipper. I also grabbed the other lining piece with the pocket and align the center of it to the center of the zipper with the right side of the lining fabric facing the wrong side of the zipper. And then I pinned these edges down the same way that I did the other side. And once I pinned it down, I sewed down the edge the same way that I did the other side with a 1/4 inch seam. I cut off the excess of the zipper pieces and made the small slits along the curved edge. I opened up the pieces so that only the right sides are exposed, one side showing the main fabric and the other side showing the lining fabric. After ironing these pieces down, I top stitched along both sides of the zipper. Next was adding the bottom panel for the main fabric. I was able to use the slits that I made earlier to line up the pieces in the center. I pinned down the center first and started to pin the rest of the piece down, but as I got to the curved edge of the purse, I made 3 to 4 slits on the bottom panel in order to make it easier for it to curve. And I did the same when I was pinning the other side down as well. Then I sewed all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And once I finished that, I went back in and made a few slits on the curved edge through both layers of fabric, making sure not to cut into the seam. And this is what the piece looked like so far. Next, I pinned the other main side panel to the other side of the bottom panel the same way that I did this side. And I also sewed all around that edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I cut into the curved edges again. And this is what the piece looks like so far. And this is me actually struggling to open up the zipper from the wrong side. For some reason, it's extremely hard to open up the zipper from the opposite side, but that is a note to open up the zipper a little bit before you completely sew in both side panels. The next step was to add the strap. I placed the strap inside, and then I'll pull one side of the strap through the 2 pieces of the main fabric on the side of the bag. And then I did the same for the other side, but before I sew them down, I just double checked that the strap was not twisted on the inside. Then I sewed a straight line down across all layers of the fabric, including the strap on both sides. After I sewed that down, I cut off the excess fabric on the sides. And then I added the bottom panel for the lining fabric the same way that I did the main fabric. With right sides facing, I pinned the center of the bottom panel to the center of the side panel. And then I also did a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. And then I pinned the other side panel to the other side of the bottom panel, the same way I did the other sides. But this time when I sewed the edge for this side, I left about a 4-inch hole in order to turn the purse right side out. And I used this hole to pull all of the right sides of the fabric through. And the next step was to close the hole that I left to turn the piece right side out. So I grabbed the lining piece with the hole and I top stitched on top of that hole. Next, I grabbed the ribbon that I wanted to use for the lacing of the butterfly, and I cut the ribbon 25 inches. And then I barely touched the edges of the ribbon with the lighter to stop the edges of the ribbons from unraveling. You can also sew down the edges of the ribbon instead if you don't have a lighter. And since this is a jean purse, I wanted to fringe the edges of the butterfly. So I just scraped along the edges of the butterfly with my nail in order to add the fringe. And I did this around the outer butterfly as well as the inner butterfly pieces. Next, I added the ribbon and I laced it like tying a shoe with the crisscross. and I tied it into a cute little bow at the end. And that is the final purse. I hope you guys love it if you decided to follow along. And this is the other version of the purse I made. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.